Elias lived within the confines of a digital grid. His existence was not measured in memories or breaths, but in 15-minute increments of blue, green, and red on a high-resolution screen. As a high-performing corporate executive, he was the architect of his own efficiency, a man who had mastered the art of existing without ever truly being present. To the outside world, he was a success story, a pillar of productivity in a modern, sterile metropolitan city. Inside, the gears turned in a void. Every morning began with rhythmic precision. The alarm would chime at 5:30 a.m., and Elias would rise like a clockwork soldier, his feet hitting the cold floor at the exact same second every day. In the kitchen, the coffee machine hissed, producing a liquid that was bitter, steaming, and dark. Elias drank it in mechanical gulps, never tasting the acidity or feeling the warmth against his throat. It was merely fuel for the engine. His drive to the office was a sensory blackout. He would arrive at his parking spot with no memory of the turns he had taken or the people he had passed. He delivered greetings like a script, offering a nod, calibrated to be professional yet hollow. Before he had left the house that morning, his wife Sarah had tried to breach the fortress of his routine. She stood by the kitchen island, her eyes searching for a flicker of the man she had married a decade ago. She mentioned a dream she had, her voice soft and hopeful for a moment of genuine connection. Elias didn't look up as he adjusted his tie. He responded with a scripted corporate-style answer, suggesting they circle back to her emotional concerns during a scheduled dinner later in the week. He even checked his watch to see if her sentence had cost him any travel time. He didn't see the way her hand dropped or the shadow of grief that crossed her face. To Sarah, being married to Elias felt like mourning a man who was still standing in the room. Sitting at his expansive glass desk later that afternoon, a sudden silence fell over his mind. He looked at a small, colorful drawing his daughter had made, which sat tucked away in a corner of his office. He tried to visualize her face, but a terrifying gap opened in his memory. He knew her name and her grade level, but he realized with a jolt of cold realization that he could not remember the color of her eyes. Were they brown like his, or did they hold the hazel tint of her mother's? He touched his chest, searching for a pulse, but his heart felt like a steady mechanical pump. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt it race with genuine excitement or thud with the raw energy of fear. The afternoon brought a major presentation, a high-stakes performance where Elias excelled. He moved through his slides with the precision of a surgeon, winning over the board of directors with cold logic and undeniable data. He was a master of the autopilot life. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Yet, as the applause of the room filled his ears, a notification pinged on his phone. It was a reminder of a deep personal promise he had made to his daughter weeks ago. He had forgotten it for his calendar. That night, Elias stood before the bathroom mirror, the fluorescent light exposing every line on his face. He looked at the stranger in the reflection and felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't living a life. He was merely observing a machine. He found an old photograph from 10 years ago and saw a version of himself with eyes that were bright and full of unscripted joy. He didn't recognize that man. It was then he realized he had effectively deleted a decade of his own weary gray soul. The morning after finding the photograph, Elias felt the weight of that joyful stranger's gaze pressing against his ribs. He woke up before the alarm, his eyes snapping open in the dark. Today would be different. He stepped into his car, resolved to break the loop. Instead of the highway, he steered toward the coastal road. But as he approached the intersection, his mind drifted toward the morning's KPI report. When his focus returned, he realized with a sickening jolt that he had already merged back onto the highway. His hands had steered the wheel without his permission. His muscles were trained soldiers, loyal only to the routine. The autopilot was a biological architecture. He was a passenger in his own skin, watching the gray asphalt blur beneath him as the car carried him toward the office. Inside the lobby, Elias saw through a fractured lens. The barista moved with dead-eyed precision, synchronized with the hiss of the steam. Elias saw commuters flowing like a turgid river of suits, all in battery saver mode, their faces illuminated by pale blue light. It was a ghost society, a city of sleepwalkers moving through a world they no longer felt. They were efficient, productive, yet utterly hollow. Elias felt a scream rising in his throat, but he merely straightened his tie and stepped out onto the 34th floor. The afternoon meeting was a theater of cold optimization. The boss sat at the head of the table, eyes narrow. The agenda was simple, streamlining. This meant deciding the fate of Marcus, a friend who had helped Elias climb the corporate ladder. Marcus was talented but inefficient by the company's new standards. Elias felt a spark of rebellion, a desire to defend his mentor. But as the boss looked at him, Elias's corporate conditioning kicked in. His voice, steady and detached, presented the data that made Marcus look obsolete. He sold out his friend with the cold precision of an algorithm. As he spoke, he felt a part of his soul wither. The machine was in control. That evening, when the silence in the house was heavy, Sarah sat across from him, her plate untouched. Elias tried to apologize for the forgotten promise to their daughter, but the words came out like a rehearsed PR statement. Sarah didn't yell. She simply looked at him with profound sadness. She told him she was mourning him, treating their home like a funeral parlor for a man who had vanished. She spoke of him in the past tense, describing the version of Elias in the photograph as a distant relative who had perished. She was living with a phantom, a shell that wore her husband's clothes and spoke with his voice. In the basement, Elias found his dusty, rusted guitar. He remembered a time when music felt like breathing. He tried to play a simple chord, but his fingers were stiff, calloused by keyboards. The strings bit into his skin, and the sound was a discordant jangle. He had completely lost the touch. He sat in the dim light, the guitar resting uselessly on his lap, and finally broke down. He wept for the music he had let die and for the realization that his hands no longer knew how to create, only how to manage. His body began to reject the mechanical life. During a routine task the next day, Elias experienced a crushing panic. His chest tightened as if an iron band were being cinched around his lungs. His heart thrashed against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was a physical revolution. Before he recovered, the boss called him up and offered the senior vice presidency. It was the ultimate validation of efficiency. But Elias saw a death warrant. This promotion would solidify the autopilot lifestyle forever, burying the man in the photograph. And he stood at the sharp edge. He could either sign the paper and finally die inside, or destroy everything to find the man who knew how to play the guitar. The promotion ceremony was a masterclass in sterile opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears over a sea of tailored suits, and the air smelled of expensive cologne, anxiety, and the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. The boss stood at the mahogany podium, his smile as sharp and manufactured as a razor blade. He began to introduce Elias as the pinnacle of efficiency, the man who had turned human variables into predictable growth. Elias felt the heavy weight of the contract in his breast pocket, a document that promised total security in exchange for his soul. As he stepped up to the microphone, the silence of the room was absolute, or a vacuum waiting to be filled with buzzwords. Elias didn't look at his notes. He looked at the rows of faces, shadows flickering in the blue light of their own ambition. He realized that if he spoke their language now, he would never speak his own again. He cleared his throat and spoke about the bitter taste of coffee he had stopped tasting years ago. He spoke about the photograph of a stranger and the terrifying realization that he had forgotten the color of his daughter's eyes. The room turned cold. People shifted uncomfortably, their battery saver mode glitching. Elias told them that success was a desert if you were too numb to feel the sand. The boss's face contorted into professional fury. In the hallway afterward, the confrontation was seismic. The master of autopilot hissed that Elias was throwing away a legacy for a momentary glitch. He offered a choice: retract the statements or lose every safety net. Elias looked at the man and saw only a machine that feared the manual mode. For the first time in a decade, Elias felt a surge of genuine, terrifying adrenaline. It wasn't stress, it was the electric hum of being alive. He handed back the keycard, the plastic clicking against the glass like a gavel, and walked out. The descent was immediate. Status vanished, and financial uncertainty loomed. Yet, as Elias drove home, taking the scenic way, noticing the orange light of sunset, he felt a lightness bordering on euphoria. He arrived at his house not as a ghost, but as a man. He found his daughter in the backyard, surrounded by the smell of damp earth and blooming jasmine. And he didn't offer a scripted apology. Instead, he simply sat in the grass beside her. He looked at her eyes and saw the vibrant hazel that he had once feared was lost. He didn't check his watch. He was just there, an undivided presence. Sarah watched from the window and saw a husband returning from the dead. Living manually wasn't a fairy tale. It was messier and harder without the armor of his calendar. There were moments of doubt and the sting of lost prestige, but the trade-off was the return of the world. The next morning, Elias stood in his kitchen. He ground the coffee beans, listening to the crunch and smelling the earthy aroma. He felt the steam against his skin and the heat of the ceramic mug. He took a sip and actually tasted the bitterness and the warmth. He looked out the window and smiled at the sunlight, not because it was time to work, but because the light was beautiful. You might be sitting there now, scrolling through this on the same autopilot that once claimed Elias. Your life might be a series of checkboxes, routines that have bleached the color from your world. You are efficient, but are you present? The machine is comfortable, but it is a coffin. Wake up, look at the people you love, taste your food. The clock is ticking. Your time is a finite resource, and every second on autopilot is a second deleted from your story. Don't wait for a promotion to realize you are already bankrupt. Break the loop while you still have the strength to feel your own heart. The world is waiting for you to live it manually.